that might be hard to see if you're in the back row, I assume. So please take advantage of that. I'm putting it on there because I believe in transparency, and I want to put those resources out there because I remember being a coach in this room, sitting there and kind of going like, I just need someone to help me figure out what to do tomorrow, right? And I just need someone to give me some ideas that I can think about for next week. And I think about going to some of these national clinics and hearing coaches talk about their national champion and going, that's not who I work with. What do I do with the kids that I work with? And then they didn't help. So my hope is that this can be helpful. My background is in English education. My favorite sports movie is Moneyball. It's just important to me that you know that. But as you can see from my little certifications there, I've spent a good amount of time working on this strength and conditioning thing. And I'm not sure there's any field that's more abused by that high-level coach coming in saying, this is what I do, than strength and conditioning being transferred down to the high school level, right? Because a lot of the stuff that we find ourselves listening to people talking about doing is not appropriate for high school athletes, and it's setting them back and stunting their growth, right? So we're gonna really dive into that. We're gonna go into a lot of different movements that we can be doing. We're gonna go into some different ways to think about loading, and we're gonna really focus on this metaphor of the tree. Again, former English teacher, you have to deal with extended metaphors today, right? So essentially what we're talking about is all of that fancy stuff that you say, oh, the coach from the U of M is doing this, right? I've worked a lot of these strength camps where like, I think we should be doing this, right? That is all this nice foliage up here. That's the stuff people see. But unfortunately, that's not the stuff that we as coaches do. We're down here. We're putting down roots so that tree can grow, right? And if we spend too much time on the foliage and not enough time on the roots, that tree is just begging to fall down, and manifest as hamstring issues, as pulled quads, as calves, shin splints, name your thing, right? So we need to be thoughtful about how are we putting down roots that are appropriate for this kid in their development. So first piece I want to talk about, again and again and again in all of my presentations, we're talking about transfer of training. What are you doing, and how well is that thing that you're doing transferring to the event that you coach, right? I can do a 60-second sit-up test all day and go from 60 sit-ups in a minute to 80, and my high jump stayed the same, right? We can invest a lot of time in some stuff that doesn't really matter, right? And that's the thing that's important, because your time is finite, your energy is finite, and their time and energy is finite too. So what Dr. Bondarchuk, the former Soviet national throws coach, did was he sent these surveys out to athletes all across the world for 4 Olympic cycles. And then he got results based on these tests and correlated them to their jump performance. And then from there, could kind of collaborate through and start thinking about which events or which activities are transferring best. So there's 2 ways we can read this. We can think about going across and reflecting on, all right, how does absolute speed, right, max velocity transfer as my high jumper gets better and better and better? Because maybe it's really important at the beginning and becomes less important later. Or maybe it stays the same. We can see this kind of stays the same. A great example is this barbell snatch. Starts out of questionable importance, works its way up, goes back down, works its way up, but kind of hangs out in that weak transfer range, right? These are all R values, so the closer you are to 1, the stronger the transfer. Under about 0.4, you're doing stuff, but it's not really doing much for you. And then the closer you get to -1, the more it's hurting you. Think about that -1 value as like, oh, my marathon training is going great, but my high jump seems to have stagnated for some reason. Well, you're lucky all that happened was it stagnated, right? So the other way to think about this is if I am a 4'11" high jumper, and again, I coach mostly women up at the university, so I'm pulling numbers on what women do. Because every time I go to these presentations, it's just what men do, and I get really frustrated. And these are ranges that a lot of our male high jumpers, if you've got a guy high jumper jumping higher than 6'7", way to go. You've transcended the chart. But most of us, this is kind of helpful numbers. So if I'm trying to go from 4'11" to 5'3", where is the bang for my buck? right? So we can kind of read the column vertically to start reflecting on what are the activities that I can do that are going to really pay off for me. And we'll move through these in a couple chunks, right? We'll talk about speed. What are the speed activities that are significant? What are the elastic or plyometric activities that are significant? There's only one technique activity up there, and it's a jump from a short approach, but I don't think we get much more specific than that. And then strength activities, right? So let's start by looking at speed. That dotted green line, that's my line for transfer, right? That's the line where if it crosses that, oh great, the laser pointer doesn't work. But I have a finger, I can do that. If it's crossing this line, it's meaningful. If it's under this line, it's not doing much. It's just taking up your time and energy. Okay, we see an interesting thing. Right here, it matters a lot. It dips down a little bit, and then it starts working its way back up. Makes sense. To be a high jumper, you gotta learn how to high jump at some point. The early levels, it matters a whole awful lot. Right? Let's take a look at speed stuff. And you'll start noticing, those of you that were in my previous presentations, high jump seems to just live on another planet compared to the other jumping events. Right? Remember how important 430s and max velocity were? Here it's barely above the transfer line. Acceleration, barely above the transfer line. 60-meter sprint, barely above the transfer line. Oh my God, am I doing this super wrong? Should I shout back? That's a really negative transfer. But then we see our 100 meters from block. That one's far and away the most important. What? That's what I'm saying. All right. So there's a couple reasons this might be happening, right? And it's a little speculation on my part because it doesn't make a ton of sense, right? I think the ability to endure mechanics matters a lot, especially when you're running. I don't know how I'm going to make it. And then the other piece of it is high jumpers can be too fast, right? If you're coming into that takeoff, you're running the curve, and then you hit that takeoff posture, and you're coming in too fast, that leg's going to buckle and you're just going to go flying into the water, right? So maybe max velocity doesn't matter so much. Maybe optimal velocity matters a little bit more, right? And so maybe that's what this is kind of picking up on, is your ability to maintain an optimal velocity rather than your max velocity. All right, let's talk about multi-jumps. So there's our standing long jump, there's our standing triple jump, 5-fold jump, so that's double leg jump, right, left, right, right, 5 bounds. 10-fold jump, same thing, but 10 bounds. So how far can you make 10 bounds go? Right, that's something that you can measure very easily, and obviously, it's way up there. It's way, way up there compared to everything else. So obviously, it's a jumping event. Surprise, surprise, being able to jump well seems to pay off, right? That transferability, to my mind, has two truly big things, right? And it's these bottom 2 points. One, the repeat nature of the bounding makes it that you have to have control of your body in how you leave the ground, travel through the air, and then encounter the ground again, right? So the repeatability of it necessitates that you learn how to take off in control and move through the air in control. Probably pretty important for a high jumper, especially someone that's going to be rotating about 2 axes the whole time, right? Likewise, I think it also matches the speeds involved in the high jump approach, right? You get 10 bounds going, you're moving pretty quick as you go, right? It matches the speeds of the approach, which means you're getting 10 takeoffs at game speed, right? That's not something you get so much with triple jump, where game speed is going really, really fast. This is kind of matching that really closely. And then again, here's my strength test stuff, and as someone who's invested a lot of time in strength and conditioning, this is always disheartening to put up, right? So there's my barbell snatch. That's that classic measurement of power, right? How fast can I move a heavy weight? That's my power output. Here's my half squat. Pretty strong, pretty important, right? Classic measure of like, oh, I'm gonna grit my teeth, but I'm gonna get through this, right? There's your forward throw of the shot, there's your backward throw of the shot. So we got a lot of really questionable stuff going on right there. So we see though, strength matters in the high jump in a way that it didn't seem to matter with my other jumping events. So what do we do about this gets into a whole other mess of, well, what do I do with my ectomorphic, kid that's built like me, right? All bone and skin. That's not someone that's super duper built for piling the weight on. And if I do pile the weight on and I gain a bunch of hypertrophy muscle mass, is that just gonna flatten me out so I'm not special and jump high anymore? Uh-oh. We know it matters, but it seems fraught with peril. English teacher. So, here's what matters to me. I'm looking at speed, multi-jumps, and strength. Or speed, multi-jumps, strength, and short jumps. So there's my technique. There's my jump from a short run up. There's my 100 meter from blocks, a little less important. There's my half squat, really right there with technique for a lot of this. There's my bounding, arguably more significant than the actual jump itself. Right? So what do I do about that? Clearly I need to bound, but I also need a high jump. So let's start putting it together into reasonable progressions and key performance indicators. That's a long sentence, and I'm sure people in the back can't read it. Essentially all it's saying is high jump is really complicated, so maybe work on that. Right? Thank you very much, it's been fun. Likewise, speed. Well, we know that max velocity and acceleration are important in these early years of development, but they're not the most important thing for high jumping. So we probably want to patiently work on those things to set us up for the 100 meter stuff, but we don't want to devote all of our time to that, because your time and energy are finite. Here's where it gets tricky. Strength. We want to develop power, strength, and stability in single leg movements with deep positions before rushing to heavy double leg loaded stuff. Right? So typically we choose to, and we'll kind of get into this in a second, but we want to start with power. I know I had my little power doesn't transfer great. You know what else doesn't transfer great? Getting hurt in the weight room. Right? So we need to be thoughtful about what is transferring where and how are we progressing safely. For elastic ability, your multi-jump training should be introduced early as the primary mode of physical development. Right? If I am trying to build a better engine for my car or a bigger engine for my car, that's my engine. Right? The strength stuff, well, let's just say it's my transmission. I don't know, I love a good metaphor, but I didn't think that one through very clearly. There's my endurance, again, probably of mixed importance, but we want to think about, okay, how can I endure jumps into a meet? Because we've all had that high jumper that has a day and did 15 jumps for some reason because they kept making it on the third attempt. Thanks. Yeah.
When you're saying deep positions for that strength one, is that like a full squat, or is that down to as far as a half squat? Or
I'm going full squat. I may transition to more of a half squat as the season goes on, but for a young athlete, I'm going full depth. I'm taking advantage of that mobility because I don't want them to lose that as life goes on. So we're focusing on elastic ability and strength here. Here's a couple principles of multi-jumps. We're just going to remember force production, force absorption, and force application are your biggest, most important things, right? How do they produce force as they leave the ground? How do they absorb force as they encounter the ground? And how do they apply that force? Because the biggest limiter, I'm inclined to believe, isn't your force production capability, it's your force application. If the body senses that you are out of control, the body's governor says, nope, you are not doing this. You are not doing this at full power, you are going to hurt yourself. Right? So it reins back. Practicing that force application is sometimes the biggest bang for your buck. Right? There's the neural side of things with your recruitment rate coding and synchronization. We're not going to worry a ton about that, but it's a nice benefit. And then your strength, right? And we'll get into this in a second here. If I have kids whose strength work is stagnating, and I saw this a lot when I was in the head strength and conditioning coach role, my solution wasn't hammering the strength harder. My solution was backing off on the strength and giving them plyos. And that helped them break through into that next level. We'll get into why that was in a second. My plyos are also my movement screens. I'm using that to watch how springy are you looking, do I need to back off, do I need to go harder, stuff like that. This is the other piece that I think about, right? If we look at this girl who's just doing a really basic hopping plyo, The joint angles here are not so different from the joint angles there, right? This transfer is to sprinting. Here are two women getting ready to take off in the long jump. Pretty comparable joint angles. All from just little hopping stuff, right? We don't need to get super fancy with it. We just need to put down good roots. The fancy stuff can come later when the roots are developed and taken root. So, here's the force velocity curve. We talk about this a lot in the strength conditioning world. It's pretty simple, right? Activities that require a lot of force, like a super duper heavy squat, can't have a lot of velocity, right? We've all seen the kid that's gritting his teeth and pulling faces just trying to stand up. On the flip side of that, if we think about like a squat jump, things that have a lot of velocity can't have a lot of force. That's just kind of how the body tends to work with how the sarcomeres pull against each other. Typically, you see this curve met with stuff like this. Like, oh, up here, high force, low velocity, that's your max strength work. Right? Down there, that's your speed work. And then typically a well-meaning coach will put this next to it. There's my Olympic lift, my power lift, my weighted jumping, blah, blah, blah. And coaches will talk about, you gotta surf the curve. You gotta do all of it. Well, the problem with that is that's not actually how it works. The curve actually looks like that. When you get to the other side of that y-axis, and this comes back to that force absorption, right? When I land my jump, when I land my plyometric and get ready to rebound and take my next jump, you have very high forces with very high velocities. It's just happening in the negative direction. This is why you can be way more sore from a high demand plyometric workout than you can be from a lifting hit. Because the forces are profound and the speeds of contraction are profound. And if I'm trying to get a kid through that weightlifting wall, I'm leaning on plyos because I can expose them to bigger forces in more profound ways. Right? So, multi-jumps and sprinting, while people would often tell you they live down here, they actually live over here. And that's important to remember that that is your highest demand activity that you are going to do over the course of a week. Even though kids think about the weight room as, this is where I'm really doing it. Maybe, I don't know. Right, so this to me, this is one of my favorite little rudimentary series. This should look familiar to those of you that were in the triple jump. All of these women buy are every event group 400 meter and down. Okay? We do this with everyone. And we really emphasize the idea that we're looking for whole foot rolling contact and a lack of ankle extension. They should be doing their best to keep their feet flat and either rolling toe to heel if they're going backwards. Incidentally, if you have athletes and you're doing a little first week workout thing and you notice a kid who can do this rolling heel to toe backwards, that's your jumper. Grab them. Figure out if they're long, triple, or high, but that's your jumper. Okay? And then you'll probably have to fight the sprints coach for them. But I'm looking for simultaneous and congruent hip, knee, and ankle yielding. All that's saying is that if we think about me right here, as I yield, my torso and my shin are at the same angle. If my torso stays one way and my knees do all the yielding, that's an ACL risk. That's someone who has a movement deficiency and puts it all into their knees and is likely going to lose a knee because their big, strong hip isn't there to help carry the load, right? But these are just little basic hops where we watch for that and we help intervene.
Say that again, your shin angle and your torso angle should be the same?
Absolutely. Why don't we try? This is really hard to do from back behind the desk. Oh, I was so close.
Key point. You guys
That's
do.
pretty close. All right, so if we look at this young woman right here, I hope you can see it. Knees are, shin is at this angle, torso is at a very similar angle, right? So I'm looking for this to match this. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And so then the other piece of that is we want to think about with that yielding, are they yielding all three joints at the same rate?
Recruiting the
Or are they,
jump there.
exactly, right? Are they all yielding at the same rate? Or is the knee yielding first and the hip later? Because that's a problem too. That can put you at ACL risk as well.
Like the girl in the middle there is a much more upright posture.
Correct.
than-
Correct. So we see a little bit of that, right? She's someone who we've been hammering a lot of like, you need to run more upright. And so this is kind of transferred a little negatively at this point. But yeah, that's kind of what we're talking about.
Yeah, I got to understand.
And then the other piece that can be really helpful too, as long as we're talking movement screens, is let's go back just a little further. If we watch this young woman, as she comes back this way, see how every landing the knees bow in just ever so slightly? That's a strength issue, right? That's something where we need to work on those stabilizing external rotating muscles to get her so that she turns those on as she lands, right? And that's tough. But that's something that we would also be utilizing this as a movement screen for. So really every sport that I've ever worked with, I've had to do something like this because I gotta find those ACL risks. You know, you tear an ACL, you're on track for arthritis about 20 years earlier in life if you need that knee replacement later. So save them that pain. Any other questions about that? That was a really smart question. Okay. So here's rudiment series B. This is the other thing that's really important to me. We didn't do this in the last presentation. This is skips for height, skips for distance, straight leg scissors, and flexed leg scissors. Okay? This, if I'm trying to figure out, well, what's a high jump series that I can hit over and over again, this is probably the one for me. And then there's a couple little added ones. Here you can see the young woman in the front is making kind of a classic mistake. She's mistaken getting the knee high for jumping high, right? We want that knee to block below the level of the hip in any jump that we do. And we're skipping for distance. Here we start to see two kind of classic errors, right? The woman coming in behind, you're gonna see a little wobbling back and forth because she doesn't have the strength to keep that pelvis in line right now. And then this is just a classic straight leg scissor. They're called prime times, they're called toy soldiers, whatever. Here's another classic error coming down the runway, leaning way back as they do it. We want to stay a little more upright. These are flexed leg scissors, so same scissor action, but with a bent knee. They got very confused as they did that, and they just kind of ran. So I jumped on the runway and did my best. It went okay, right? But essentially what that is you've got the same kind of prime time straight leg scissor thing going. There's just a little bit of bend at the knee. And then you're coming down, hitting the ground with the back of the ball of the foot. And I love that movement because it sets you up well to learn how to bound from there. Because then it's just a stone's throw away from saying, hey, instead of hitting with the back of the ball of your foot, I want you to wait for the ground to come to you, lead with the heel, bounce off of it. Right? You just slide a little different ground contact pattern at the end and suddenly they've got it.
Is that a whiskey day or a water day?
That's a whiskey day. Yep. Sorry, for those of you that weren't here in previous conversations, a mentor once told me that I asked him a question about training, and he said, John, I drink whiskey and I drink water. Water's good for me and whiskey gets the job done quick. I don't touch beer. And I'm like, okay, but I asked you a question about triple jump, and he was like, we're talking about triple jump. Oh, it's a metaphor, right? So, but that was the general idea, right? That was kind of a high intense. If we're really stretching that out and going for 40 meters and telling you, like, I want you bounding as hard as you can, that's a whiskey day. So, if we're talking about plyos, those are my roots, right? Those two things. And from those two, I build out to everything else, right? It's not far to go from rudiment B to an extended bound series. It's not far to go from rudiment A to an in-place jump series. It's not far from there to go to horizontal, vertical bounds, depth jumps, whatever, right? But you're just working your way to different branches of the tree based on where you are. But you can't work your way all the way out to here unless you've done everything you need to get to that branch in the first place.
Do you get to all these in a season, or is this over the course of a...
This is over the course of a career. I'll get to these in a season. I'll touch these a little bit in a season. We'll do a little of this. I don't get many kids to depth jumps, right? I'm waiting for other things like your extended bounds to slow down and not be quite the force producers anymore. Depth jumps can be great, but I'm gonna exhaust other means before I go to that one. Great question. Other questions about any of that? Okay. So, one last thing, and this is something I just kind of discovered over the course of getting it wrong a lot. Plyos have vertical and horizontal orientations. right? Our rudiment, there's a lot of bouncing up and not a lot of forward. Our bounds have a lot of forward and some up. This can get really confusing to high jumpers. If I'm bounding them a lot, they're so great at applying that force to go forward. And then I get them on the high jump apron and they go forward instead of up, right? So it's worth keeping that in mind, that we need to be thoughtful about when am I using horizontal and when am I using vertical. And we'll get into when I kind of make that shift in a second here. But we're gonna, before that, thus concludes principles of plyometrics. Here's some principles of strength training in a long-term progression. We're just gonna blow right by this because the slides will be available. And we're gonna talk about all this as we go. Here's an important one, right? This is a study done in the mid-50s where basically what they did was they took grip strength, because most people don't really train grip strength, right? And then what they did was they tracked how is your strength naturally growing as you age. And what they found was that women are natural, and you see this, right? They shoot up, they have their growth spurt, and then their body fills out after that, right? That cross-sectional area of the muscles is just getting bigger. Women are getting stronger naturally until their late teens, right? Men are getting stronger until their mid-20s. It's just naturally happening. So we don't, as coaches, need to put a huge emphasis on that because they're doing it anyway. What we need to do is give them opportunities to apply that strength and develop the stabilizing muscles inherent in athletic movement. Okay? We're teaching them how to move using strength training. We're not going after a heavy barbell max squat because once you it's like a trump card playing hearts. Once you play that card, you don't get it back. If I play that max strength card when this kid's 15, what am I gonna do when he's 18? I already played it. He's gonna get stronger, but that's just kind of how puberty works. So we gotta be thoughtful about when we use some of these things. So delay the maximal strength to the best of your ability. Delay it, delay it, delay it. Okay? Here's a couple interesting pieces that I found over the course of, again, a career of getting it wrong. This is a nice little study where they talk about trained, untrained, and athletes. Athletes being essentially professional athletes. Trained being people who maybe they're not getting paid for it, but they're training like it's their job. So these are collegiate level athletes. These are high level D1, D2 people. And then untrained is people that are fresh to the weight room. Untrained individuals experience the greatest returns at 60% one rep max. 60%, that's nothing, right? Those kids, if we rush them under a heavy barbell, we just skipped ahead and we can't go back and get that. Get the gains there that are easy, right? Recreationally trained athletes or people that train like it's their job, they hang out around 80% of 1RM, right? That is the vast majority of people that I will encounter. People in high school or early years of college are going to be more in that untrained group, depending on their sport background. And then professional athletes will need loads exceeding 85% one rep max. So we really don't need to hang out around that 90, 95 very often. It might be detrimental. All right, and then the last piece, the number of sets. Untrained and recreationally trained athletes typically experience their most significant improvement in 4 sets. Right? You just don't need very much. Higher level athletes, they need like 8 sets. It takes all day. It's a nightmare. So, you don't want that. Time's precious. Last piece, sorry, I thought the last one was the last piece. Untrained athletes are getting big gains if they train like 2-3 days a week. Trained athletes goes down a lot if you jump it up to 3 days a week. And then really experienced athletes, it just stays flat. You might as well just stay at 2 days a week. If they're really raw in the beginner, and we kind of talked about this in the last presentation, right? If they're the person that's riding their Huffy and they go in the ditch and they get back up and they're fine. If they're the person that's driving a Ferrari and they go in the ditch, they're not getting back up fine. They need less time driving the fast car. So, there's that piece. Here's what I see as the roots of strength, and this is no different from my plyos. Production, absorption, and application. concrete versions of that are joint stability movements and body weight strength, or very lightly loaded body weight strength, which I might call basic strength. Okay? Then from there, we get to all the fun stuff, right? You can go do your triphasic, whatever the latest gimmick is, it's all good. But unless you got those roots down there, there's no point, right? Exhaust that stuff first. And so I always think about, and this is, you can tell I procrastinated a lot on the videos for this because I have a really rough couple of minutes here. But this is the phase one that I always think about. When I get someone in who's new and is like, John, I've never lifted before. And I'm like, okay, this is the joint stability, and I call it, quote, get fast first, right? Learn how to move your body with quality, good technique, and velocity. Then work on your loading, right? I'm using this to remediate mobility issues. If I see you can't squat, I'm taking a look at glute mobility, I'm taking a look at calf mobility, I'm figuring out what the problem is, because I can't let that problem endure if they're gonna load heavy, right? All of a sudden you end up with the kid that, we've all seen him, gets under the barbell and is squatting kind of like this, and then realizes I'm in trouble and goes back up for less than a quarter squat. What did he accomplish? Right? So we've got lots of reps, we've got lots of unilateral or single leg, we've got one leg to the other types of movements. And I find at this group, because we're not doing 1 rep max, the best thing to do is give them 20 to 40% of their body weight. So I prescribe a percentage of body weight in a range that I let them live in. Right? You can tell I've got 25 pounds in each hand and I am miserable right now. And then there's a good one in a second here. Yeah, this is the one. Do I look like I'm moving, like I'm not being challenged? Right? That's tough stuff. It's good planes of movement. It's working on mobility, right? Get into that kind of a deep side lunge and tell me that you're not getting mobility kick out of that. This is one that I love doing with athletes that pivot a lot. Right? We gotta be careful, but there's good core stability, there's good rotation and anti-rotation, and I'm getting a squat out of the deal. Right? So this is a range, right there you can see the misery. I do this one a lot with young athletes because it's a good movement indicator, right? Are we going valgus in the knee? Is my arch collapsing? Can they squat down and just tap the box? Can they do that with more speed? Can they hold a ball over their head while they do it? Or are they like me and have shoulder mobility problems and need to hold it like this? Right? If they can do that, they're ready to get under a barbell. If they can't do that, I'm pretty worried about their stability. Right? You can live in that get fast first range and that joint stability range for a long time and be really strong doing it and be really safe doing it, right? I'm here, I'm dropping, and oh, I can't do it. Okay, I put my foot down and I'm fine, right? There's not high stakes there. We can be careful and cautious. These are a couple other circuits that I do. This gets back into the get fast first mentality. These are from Vern Gambetta. I get my dumbbells, I get 15, 20% in each hand, and I'm ripping out reps as fast as I can. Right? Does that look like that's going to get me more powerful? Absolutely. Right, we'll do another one in a second here. So we've got our high pull to press. They're throwing that weight. Right? That's an athletic movement. If I walk into a weight room and I see a freshman throwing weight with 20% of body weight in each hand, holy cats. I want that kid doing my sport. Right? In a second here, we'll be doing a squat to press. Same kind of more misery. Right? Up and down, fast. Right? Force isn't complicated. Force is just mass times acceleration. Oh wait, no. Acceleration of velocity. Who's a physics teacher? Okay. Yeah. So if I'm accelerating the weight down and decelerating at the bottom and then accelerating it back up or negatively accelerating it, right? That's a lot of force going through my body. I don't need to load heavy because the acceleration is so profound, right? Same deal. This circuit absolutely whoops, right? It's squats at 1 rep per second. Do 10 to 20 squats at 1 rep per second and tell me you feel good the next day. We're lunging at 1 rep every 1.5 seconds. So we just put a timer out there and say, hey, you got 30 seconds to get 20 squats in. Get cooking. Right? Then we've got our step up jumps. Right? there's more force because you're trying to accelerate yourself off the box. And then we'll have squat jumps in a second. We'll have kids. I had a young woman who was squatting, what was she squatting? About 150 pounds. And she switched from a cycle because she was just getting bored with squatting to this, where she held a 20-pound dumbbell for the whole thing. Do 20 reps of each. She came back and squatted 180 the next time. Just doing this.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you use any inertial stuff like Versapulli or something like that?
No, I don't, because I don't have money in my budget for that. But I would love to try that. I think that inertial stuff has a lot of really interesting and profound places it can go with.
Because you're talking about eccentric a lot, and that's what you can really polish it with that. We work with that, and and I've been working for. And that's really useful.
It's profound, isn't it?
Yeah.
Oh man, we should talk more about that.
Okay.
So here's some of the other circuits. The one benefit that came out of COVID for me was I had to write a lot of body weight circuits that they could do at home, right? So we wrote a lot of these things. You know, tell me we're not working on stability while they're doing a balanced boulder squat and reach, right? Doing some staggered stance stuff, doing some lunging and twisting, doing some speed skaters. We had a lot of kids come back way stronger after COVID because they just hammered this body weight strength stuff so hard, right? And we missed this a lot because we're so eager to get them under a barbell. And I think the beautiful thing about this is a weight room is now wherever I go, right? As opposed to a place that I need to fight the other coaches to get time, right? So to my mind, the most important part of weight room is room, not weights. That skater squat sucks. I hated that. So there's that piece. Here's a couple more videos. These are some things I get after when I'm training stabilizing muscles. So obviously, there's lots of single leg exercises that I do. But we're also doing a lot of mini band stuff, where they're just pulling the band up and holding it. They're lunging sideways, keeping the band off the ground, right? They're twisting and drawing circles. They're doing all kinds of stuff. If you don't have mini bands, I do a lot of stuff like that on the ground. Just lift your leg. Tell me those bottom leg lifts don't hurt like crazy. And this is something that I frequently just plug into my warm-ups every day, right? You're not doing a profound amount of it, but you're doing a little bit of it every day to work on those stabilizer muscles. We can get those stabilizer muscles strong. The shin splints seem to fade, right? But anytime I have kids that aren't strong single leg, the shin splints aren't far away, knee pain isn't far away, right? So this stability stuff, that's where I feel like I make my living. That one's great because it gets them thinking about when I squat, am I keeping my knees pushed out? Am I getting good external rotation through there? So phase 2, this is just kind of, all right, time to start putting up a barbell. 40 to 60% body weight. Focus stays on quality, technique, and velocity. Those are still the prime variables that I'm manipulating, but now I'm letting them get used to working with a barbell. Because a barbell is extremely disorienting for the kids because typically they have to learn how to move around the barbell rather than just move their body, right? That's why cleans are so difficult. On the subject of cleans, that's where we introduce very lightly loaded cleans, right? I like Olympic movements. I don't think they're necessary. If you told me give them up forever, I would, but I like them, and my kids seem to like them, so we do them, right? Phase 3, this is a typical day in the gym back when I was the head of strength and conditioning. No racks, no nothing, just out there working, okay? This is maybe junior or senior year, depending on the kid, right? It might be senior year. But this is where we're starting to finally introduce 1 rep max percentages into their training. I don't test 1 rep max with those groups. I test kind of 3 or 5 rep max. That just feels a little safer to me. And then that bottom point is big to me. I don't think I'm typically targeting more than 5 or 10% strength gains in a year. If I'm doing more than that, it's probably to the detriment of something else. So I'm being thoughtful about that side of things. So let's get back to high jump. Here's what a training week often looks like, right? And when I say often looks like, that's often what it looks like, but if I was back in high school coaching, that's definitely what it would look like, right? This is my snowed in chunk of time where I'm begging for gym space and wrestling room space and whatever I can get. Monday, I'm doing some speed, I'm getting my short bounds or my rudiment in. Tuesday, I might, and then I'm getting a lift of power movements and static movements. We can get into those in a second. I might do some light bodybuilding on Tuesday if I can get back in the weight room. If I can't, let it go and I'll just do body weight circuits. Right? It depends on the kid. Wednesday, I'm getting more rudiment in, maybe rudiment series A instead of B, and then maybe Friday, I'm getting some in-place jump circuits in. If I'm only doing a 2, right, water and whiskey, if I'm only doing 2 whiskey days that week, then that's what I tend to do, right? Short bounds or rudiment B with a lift, rudiment A or in-place jumps with a lift, everything else is water. So here are short bounds, right? I'm gonna use the example of horizontal short bounds where they're going forward first. This is what I tend to use early in a season. Right, so we're just doing basic stuff, working on whole foot contacts, working on high hips and low knees, working on a nice long, low swing leg and good range of motion through the arms. You'll pick 4 to 6 exercises for 30 to 7 total takeoffs. Right, we had a great question in the last session about what does takeoffs mean? It means every time you leave the ground. So that particular movement has 5 takeoffs. Here's my remedial vertical bounds. We already talked about that. That's where I'm leaning on rudiment. Here's an in-place jump circuit. I love these, again, for giving variety to the movement, right? If I'm not taking my jumpers and running repeat 100s and 200s, maybe I'm doing circuits of this stuff, right? I can get a little bit of a conditioning workout while leaning on jumping rather than running, because jumpers like to jump, surprise, surprise, okay? These are also ones where I'll work on lower foot stuff and lower leg stuff. So someone asked in the previous session, is this something that you would ever do barefoot? Absolutely. I'll do it barefoot in the sand or in the grass, and it'll be nice to mobilize the foot. It'll train those little muscles of the foot and help strengthen them. I just want to be careful because I need to make sure that they're not someone that needs extra support for their feet, right? Because then that barefoot stuff can really break them up in a hurry. So that's that piece. Filming this was exhausting. So, jump technique. High jumpers, I do a lot of these repeated takeoffs where we're just working on hammer the ground over and over in the air. I might put a hurdle in front of them and tell them to jump over the hurdle. I might do some run, jump. But what I typically do is start on a straight line, right? Can you do this with only one direction that you're working through? And when they look pretty good at that, I'm going to move them to doing it on a curve, right? Not a super intense curve, but a gentle curve, and say, all right, can you do your run, jump while on a curve? Can you maintain those centripetal forces as you move about the curve in addition to maintaining the good posture and all the other things that we worked on previously, right? So these are big ones for me. Those of you in the back, I apologize if you can't see this. Feel free to check the slides later, it's all on there. What I do, and I know what you were probably thinking earlier, John, if I have 3 different phases of lifting going, does that mean I have to write 3 different workouts? Maybe. Maybe not. Depends on how you do it. I would lean hard into phase 1 if I was back in the high school, but what I like to do is I create a template, right? I've got day 1 has an Olympic derivative, so maybe that's my dumbbell alternate high pull, right? Something that has kind of a similar pulling action to a clean. I've got a squatting movement, and then I might pair that. You see the little like gray box where it's tabbed over? That's usually shorthand to my athletes that we're supersetting this, right? So you go right from one exercise to the other. Maybe I'm pairing that with a hinging movement, like an RDL, or a lunging movement, or one of those pistol squats that we showed earlier. And we're just working on that. We've got pressing movements that are horizontal, mixed with pulling movements that are vertical. And then if you look at the next day, the pressing movement is vertical and the pulling movement is horizontal. Right? So I've got my template kind of written there. Now all I do is I start asking myself, what does that look like for 3 different people? 3 different applications. And again, if you're smart, you maybe don't do this. If you like chaos like I do, okay, embrace the chaos, right? But I've got different variations here that I'm playing with. This person for their squatting movement, they're just doing a goblet squat. holding a heavy dumbbell right here and they're going up and down. This person's kind of beyond that, so they're doing a rear foot elevated split squat. Still a squatting movement. This person's doing a classic back squat, right? And that can work our way all the way down. There's doing a single leg seated squat for a support movement. There's a barbell lateral front squat, so they're holding it here and they're shifting side to side. We're living in all different realms. But you'll notice, if we start looking at the reps and sets, phase 1 has lots of 6s, 8s, and some 10s, right? All of them hanging out in 3 to 4 sets because that's where bang for their buck is. This next group, a little bit less, hanging out more around 6s, right? That bottom group there, still hanging out around 6s because it's early in the season. And then you'll notice I like to close everything with a closing module. That can be whatever the heck you want to do. Do some core, do some culminating activities like med ball throws, do some injury prevention stuff, do some mobility, do some balance activities, really whatever works for you is great. Here's my mid-season training week. I've got my extended bounds, and then I'm high jumping. Right? I don't want to overcook this kid. I've had some time to train. I'm going to rock that one thing that I know has lots of transfer, and then I'm going to high jump. Likewise, if I'm down there, I'm doing short bounds again, and then I'm doing some maybe multi-jumps because my meet on Saturday freed up a little bit of time for me. Right? So, short bounds, we talked about vertical versus horizontal. I like hurdle hops in the vertical range if they're kind of ready to graduate from that movement, but we follow the same rules as our horizontal ones. Right? You can start out, there's a lot of different variations you can do, but that's just a nice simple jump over, relax, jump again. Great for working on that starting strength. Not a lot of rebounding yet, because maybe they're not ready for that yet. Maybe after that we walk into it. So you jump, then you take a step, jump again. So you get a little horizontal movement that you're slowly adding into it. Not so much that it's confusing the body, but just enough for them to deal with some horizontal too.
What do you say to kids that land hard on their heels on this? Don't land hard.
I coach a whole-footed landing, so maybe not on the heels per se, but land and make it quiet if you need to. I think it's tricky because once we get to this stuff, you need to land kind of hard, right? And this is that kid that they can jump the hurdle, but they can't bounce it back very fast. So they need a little extra bounce in the middle there to gather themselves before they come up for a really big jump, right? And this last one, I think, yeah, this is it. Look at how quick the ground contacts are. If they're not that fast, the hurdles are too high, right? They're not spending a ton of time in contact with the ground when they're jumping. So they shouldn't be jumping so high that they, and then they summon the jump for the next thing. It should just be a quick pop, 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 right? So I have kids where we'll just get out the little 6-inch hurdles and we'll work it over that. If they can't do that, then we're sticking with rudiment, right? But if it's too high that they can't, or so high that they can't absorb the force, I messed up. And I need to get it so they can absorb that force and rebound with it. So here's some more extended bounds. We're just slowly opening things up to more interesting movements for the kids. So now, like I said, that flex leg bound might turn into some regular alternate bounding. It might turn into some very easy single leg bounding. But there's your prescription for it. You can check the slides and stuff later and mess with that as you see fit. Here are my favorite extended bounding workouts. And if you were with me last time, it's the same for you because my favorite stays the same, right? You can add some variety, right? This one without the alternate bounds, that's just rudiment B. Add the bounds. Now we've got a whole new thing for you, right? Now we can add this exercise. We can ditch a couple of the earlier ones and do a more challenging left, left, right, right pattern just to keep the complexity interesting for kids. Or we can go into this one that I really like for my triple jumpers where there's some lefts, some rights, some alternate patterns, whatever helps them, okay? So mid-season, here's my Get Fast First group. It doesn't look too different, right? But what is different is I've started giving them very specific, like, hey, you're doing a goblet squat for 4 sets of 10 with 30 for 40% body weight. I need you to get that done in 10 seconds. By changing the acceleration, I'm increasing the force that they're dealing with. I've got my step-up jumps where they're leaving the ground, right? The force has to be bigger because they're accelerating more. Likewise, we see a lot of the same patterns on that second day. My mid-season group, or my mid-season for the intermediate group, we're starting to see some changes, right? We're starting to see a little bit more loading. We're starting to see something that looks a little bit more like a heavy day and looks a little bit more like a support day, right? That first day rear foot elevated split squat, they're really getting after that. It's hard. The next day we come back and we're just doing a step up because there's not a super strenuous be in control on the way down for a step up. You just kind of step up and come back down. And you can load that step up really aggressively, right? But I often don't feel like I need to. And one of the benefits is that I don't. So you can see also in that closing module, I switched this group to more of a mobility motif because ultimately they're 14, 15, 16 years old and they spend all day sitting in a desk. We probably got to do something to help them with tight quads and tight hip flexors. Here's my experienced group. We're starting to see a heavy day and a support day, and this is something that I really encourage you to think about. If you're going to dismiss all my get fast first stuff, that's fine, right? You all have great ways that you do it and you all produce results, so I'm not worried about that. But this has been huge for me. If you have a heavy day, the next day that you train that week is not that heavy, right? So this kid is going after his back squat, right? 5 sets of 5 at 80 to 85%. Going after his bench for a bunch of 5, 5, 4, 4, 3, 3. The next day, I've switched to a rate of perceived exertion hanging out at 60 to 80%, right? Like, how hard is this? Whoops. Make it manageable. Because lifting heavy every day is going to pound the plyometric out of that kid. You can't afford that with a high jumper. Okay? So that's been huge for me. You'll also see that little AN right there. That just means as needed, right? Rest as needed to maintain the quality. That's all I need. And then also you'll see that support day looks an awful lot like an early phase. So, main comp, here's what the weeks look like. We're coming a little tight on time, so I'm not going to spend forever on this, but the multi-jumps, you'll see sports-specific choices, and then we'll get into the lift in a second. The sports-specific choices basically means hold the intensity back, up the specificity a little bit, right? So I love these hurdle jumps, right? I showed you that earlier as a technique thing that you might do. Maybe later in the season, we're really going for this. And we're saying, hey, I'm putting a taller hurdle up. I need you to jump it. And if they're nervous about whether or not they can do it, just go to the side. Right? Those little yellow smart hurdles are perfect for something like that. You can occasionally do something more intense, but it's got to be really, really carefully planned and kind of far away from competition. Because it's easy to blow them up at this point. Get creative, keep them interested, have fun with it, right? And then the bottom point to me is the most important one. The sport-specific consideration might be we're not doing plyos this week. And that's okay. They need to recover. High jump is hard. High jump blows you up. Maybe the best answer is just don't do it. Let them recover. So, to my mind, strength in this chunk of the season, you'll notice I don't have early group, mid group, whatever, because this section of time is way more about what you don't do than about any special things that you do. Right? Notice I was very careful about my words there, and I didn't say it's about what you do. Now I know who the childish ones are in the room with me. Perfect. So this starts 5 to 6 weeks out from peak fitness. I am doing no heavy lifting at all, anybody, period. Right? Those heavy squats are fundamentally extremely discoordinating to your muscles. And they need a long time to bounce back from that. Right? I had a mentor tell me a story once about how the training worked a little too well and his high jumper was jumping through the roof and he got really confused and he couldn't time anything up in the air. So coach got desperate and instead of following this, he squatted him heavy to flatten him out so that he would just not jump through the ceiling so hard. It worked, because he was smart and I'm dumb and I wouldn't think to do stuff like that. But I get away from that. I don't touch it because it is so hard and it is so discoordinating and it kills and flattens your flyers. So I'm only touching that for a brief moment. I'm getting my 5 to 10% gains and then I'm getting out of it. Okay? No big volumes, and most importantly, no being a hero. If something hurts, be done. If you feel like, no, I really gotta move this weight, you don't. I'm really leaning hard into stuff that looks an awful lot like phase 1 training for lifters. What did we do this day? Squat jumps, where we started at 30% body weight, and then we took more weight off the bar with each set. Because we're trying to jump higher and higher each time, right? I did a little stationary, and this is literally directly off my training plan from last year, by the way. This isn't me like making stuff up. Nope, I procrastinated too long. This is straight off of my training plan. They're just standing there with a barbell or a stick, and they're just switching and holding. That's all they're trying to do, right? They're gaining that balance back because the squats have been so discoordinating that they're figuring out, how do I hit the ground and just be here, strong and stable. Right? We're doing some speed bench where they're oscillating back and forth really quick. If you look here on day 2, we clean light, we do some rep split jerk where they're just pushing the barbell back and forth, and then we go home. That's it. It doesn't take much. We just move the barbell fast, we move our bodies fast, we go home and we get ready to high jump a couple days later. Because at this point we're looking more for stimulation than we are making huge gains. We're looking more to get rid of residual fatigue than we are for making new gains. And that process takes weeks. So I truly mean that when I say I let go of all the heavy stuff 5 to 6 weeks ahead of time. For the men especially. Women, you can push it a little deeper, right? This second day maybe is a little bit more of a support lift sort of thing where we're hanging out at 60 to 80%. I don't touch anything heavy. That's super important to me. And then one last word, I know we're coming up on time here. A word about ectomorphs like this woman or people like me, right? There's 3 body types, ectomorphs, mesomorphs, and endomorphs. Endomorphs are your throwers, mesomorphs are your sprinters, ectomorphs are high jumpers, right? They're all bone and skin. And a little bit of muscle and maybe a big long tendon. These people can't handle high volumes. They just can't, right? So if I'm looking at early season stuff, they are doing maybe 30 total repetitions for their lower body. Often hanging out closer to 25, right? That's not much. Probably just 1 lift per region, right? We're just squatting and getting out of there. Mid-season, if they're doing a max strength sort of day, maybe 15 reps, and we're getting out. Late season, don't even bother. Just stick to explosive lifts, stick to body weight circuits. Let them move, because this body type, which is your best high jumper, is most susceptible to strength training pounding the jump out of them. So very careful with volume for this person, because they are special. I say that knowing I'm an ectomorph, so I'm special, right? They are special for this event. And if we stick them on a football training program, they will flounder. They will not survive a training program like that. Okay? Here, we're excited because, former English teacher. Yes, sir?
So kind of going back to the body type thing,
Mm-hmm.
with your track team and with your people, would you kind of try and group them by body type a little bit, what their workouts would look like then?
Yeah, and again, it comes back to how much chaos am I willing to invite into my day. I might for like more of a mesomorphic, endomorphic build, I might write an extra support lift for the lower body, right? So, and the upper body. So you've got your main squat thing, and then, oh no, we've lost everything. Well, whatever. I had a really great joke that I was going to end on, but anyway, yeah, I would maybe add an extra support lift and get them a little bit more volume, or I might write it for my mesomorph or endomorph, and then for my ectomorph, I just cut the other support lifts. So, and that might be all it is, right? Write the workout and be like, hey, Brittany, don't do these 2 parts. I've never had one of the athletes be like, oh man, you cut something? So we'll do that stuff a lot too, where I write one program and then I just cut a couple things for some kids. So, good question. I think that's time. Thank you very, very much for having me. It meant a lot, especially those of you that stuck with me all morning. That means a lot to me because I don't know if I can stick with myself half the time. right? So thank you so much for coming up. I really appreciate it. Somewhere on here, when you get a chance to pull the slides back up on your own, my contact info is up there, and I've been really, really fortunate throughout my career to have coaches invite me to come to their practices, to have coaches take my emails when I'm very concerned about am I doing the right thing or am I crazy? And I really believe that like if you want support and you think that I'm someone that can offer some support, I want to help. Right? So don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything. If you're looking at me and you're just like, okay, well, I don't need any more of this guy, that's great. Go do something else. That's fine. But thank you very much. Have a great day.